All right, so people should be coming in. Just again, okay. Hello, Nick. I see Nick. Um, wow, I saw a lot of people waiting, and this is taking forever to. Carrie, Brenda, welcome everyone. Don, welcome. If you could let us know where you're tuning in from, we'd love that. I am in West Hartford. I'm not at the Mark Twain House, despite my background. It is a false background. It is an illusion. My books are also not this beautiful. I wish they were.
Yeah, those
Uh,
are gorgeous.
Mallory is at the Museum Center
I
in our
am.
curatorial library. And Jessica, you're Nashville, was it?
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
outside of Nashville in a little town called Gallatin.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Hi, if this is your first time here, I'll introduce myself. I'm Omar Acevedo, and I'm the Literary Program Coordinator at the Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford, Connecticut. Thank you for joining us for this virtual program for ornithography, an illustrated guide to bird lore and symbolism. Virtual programs like this are produced in part with support honoring the late Frank Lord. We are grateful to honor his memory with these programs. And I also want to thank our members. If you're not a member, please consider supporting our museum by becoming a member. There are so many benefits to becoming a member. You will receive free or discounted admission to our author programs, the house and museum, year-round discounts in the store and cafe, and much more. You can visit our website for more information. If you like coming to these author events, whether in person or online, becoming a member really pays off very quickly within probably a handful, maybe even less of author programs. So I highly recommend it. And then, yeah, you get nice discounts at the store and you can visit us. So it's really, really great. Be part of our community. So now on to our guests. Our author, Jessica Roux, is a Nashville-based freelance illustrator and plant and animal enthusiast. She loves exploring in her own backyard and being surrounded by an abundance of nature. Using subdued colors and rhythmic shapes, she renders flora, fauna, food, and many other things with intricate detail reminiscent of old world beauty. And our moderator is our very own Mallory Howard, who is the assistant curator at the Mark Twain House and Museum. So during this event, we encourage you to have a conversation with each other in the chat. If you have a specific question, though, you can go into the Q&A section. It's at the bottom of your screen. There is a little talk icon with a question mark inside, and it says Q&A. You can click on that and write your question, and we'll get to the Q&A in about 40 minutes or so. So that's all from me for now. Please sit back and enjoy, and I'll turn this over to Jessica and Mallory.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Omar. And Jessica, welcome back, I should say.
Yeah, thank
We had
you.
you a few years ago for Floriography, and now we're back for Ornithography. And as always, your books are absolutely beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I've
You
got
can
mine
see
here.
here. Yep,
Yeah.
it's gorgeous, as always. And I loved this book. It was so much fun. I learned so much along with the fact that the book is gorgeous. So to start off, in the introduction to the book, you sort of give a brief overview of the importance, some of the meanings of the birds that you talk about. And I found it particularly interesting when you talked a little bit about ornithomancy.
Mhm.
I'm saying that right,
Yeah.
which connects to ornithography. So can you explain or talk a little bit about that just to start us off?
Yeah, so ornithomancy comes from ancient Greece. And so the ancient Romans actually took it a little bit further with augury. So they kind of adopted some of those ancient Greek practices and started looking to the birds. And, there were these people that were hired as augurs, which was like very, very important in society in Rome. And so, from the word augury, we get inauguration and the word auspicious, which is like a good omen, which is really fun because, you know, it influenced politics, it influenced war. And so ancient Roman augurs would do things like look to what birds were flying in the sky at a certain time to see different signs from the birds, or they would look to chickens and they would see, oh, how much has this chicken eaten? And is that a good sign? Are they voraciously eating? Are they just pecking at their food, or are they not touching it at all? And all of those things meant different things that would influence the way they would approach a certain situation, who would be elected, warfare, and all of that. And so it became such an integral part of their practice. And yeah, so we know we don't really have so much as a language of birds like we did a language of flowers from the Victorian era. So in the book, I try to assign different meanings based on the folklore, mythology, history, and the characteristics of the different birds, which is sort of how the Victorians assign meanings to the flowers as well.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting history that I never would have thought of.
Yeah, it's so cool.
So diving into the book, you ended up choosing 100 birds to highlight in the book. How many did you have to whittle it down to, and was it difficult? And how did you go about deciding which ones you were going to include?
So I think there's 11,000 different bird species out there. So it is a daunting task. So I tried to pick birds that I really like to start with. And so, you know, I had owls and parakeets and, you know, puffins, and just trying to think of birds that, you know, off the top of my head that came to mind. And then from there, I was thinking about, you know, I want to make sure we're representing birds from around the world. And there's lots of really cool birds from like Australia and New Zealand. And so I wanted to make sure we had representation from there. There's European varieties, Asian varieties of different birds. And so I really wanted to make sure that there were lots of different regions and lots of different myths. And then from there, I wanted to make sure that the meanings were all different, you know, or as close to different as they could be. There's a lot that are similar. Like I think we have ravens for intelligence and crows for cleverness.
Right.
But you know, they're similar words anyway. So yeah, so you know, you try to get through different meanings. So there's some that got cut because I couldn't find anything, any folklore, any mythology, any interesting things about them, which was kind of sad. And then there's others that I think I just forgot they exist, so they didn't make the cut. But it is hard. There are 100, so it's like, you know, you kind of have to pace yourself when you're thinking about them too. And working on the book was a struggle because it's like, oh, there's so much information. And then, you know, talking about it almost a year plus later from the time I wrote it, it's like, what do all of them mean again?
Right.
Like
Yeah,
going
that's a
through
lot to
it
remember.
Yeah.
Was there any, now saying that you had to cut some out because they didn't really have an interesting history or story behind them, was there one in particular that you thought was visually stunning and you were kind of disappointed that it didn't have a more meaningful background that you could use?
Yeah, the roseate spoonbill, I think I'm saying that right. It's this gorgeous pink bird, and it's got a big long beak that looks like a spoon. So it's got like a little circle kind of at the end of its beak. It's gorgeous. But I couldn't find anything interesting about it, anything other than it's an interesting looking bird, you know? So, and that it's called a spoonbill because its bill looks like a spoon, which like there's not really much meaning you can get from there.
Right.
But I
Well,
love
and
birds. I wish we need to have a folk tale about those.
I know. Well, and that's something I loved besides your beautiful illustrations is how interesting the tidbits and the stories and the facts you included were. So that definitely makes the book come even more alive, which I love. Can you talk a little bit about your process as far as writing and illustrating? Do you do one before the other? Do you have a specific workspace? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So I always try to start with the writing. And in particular, I want to do it because like the spoonbill, I want to make sure the birds that I'm including like actually have some depth and meaning to them. And then with ornithography, I tried to do some of the illustrations. There's elements that kind of pair with the meaning. Let me try to find an example. Oh, like here's our nightingale with the rose. Yeah, which,
Beautiful.
that comes from Persian folklore and an Oscar Wilde story, so they all kind of tie in together. So yeah, I wanted to make sure that the research is first, then the writing, and then from there, I start working on the illustrations. And so I'll always do a sketch first to kind of lay out the composition on the page. And then from there, I transfer it to, it's like this nice printmaking paper, and I'll do a detailed pencil drawing. And I have one here actually.
Ooh.
Yeah. I have the lyre bird, which is really pretty. I don't know if you can see it too well, but it's pretty light. It's
Oh,
pencil.
yes.
Yeah, so you kind of get like the
Wow.
detail and the texture in there. And then from there, I'll scan that in and digitally paint underneath it in Photoshop. So the Photoshop kind of adds all the color, it adds more light to dark shades, highlights, shadows, and that kind of thing. Lets me do like colored backgrounds and that, kind of look. So it kind of has like a vintagey feel, and it's sort of half traditional, half digital process. And I do almost all of it in this room here in my house, my little studio room, which is a bit of a mess, but it's not too bad right now. I just moved all like the boxes and things to like the front so no one can see them.
It's amazing. Well, so how long would you say on average it takes each drawing for you to do? I mean, obviously some
Yeah.
are probably a little bit more complicated than others, but is there kind of an average as far as how long?
I would like in an ideal world, I would like to spend like a full day on each
Hmm.
one. But I'm always cutting it close with my deadline. So I think I was ended up doing like about 1.5 a day towards the end of the project, just because time management, gets away from you.
Yeah, that's a lot of work to take on.
It
So that's
is,
very
it's
impressive.
fun, but it is a lot. My hand hurts at
Yes.
the end of the day.
Oh, I'm sure. Now, I want to talk to you about some specific birds that you have. And in Connecticut, for example, our state bird is the American robin. And
Ooh,
I was fascinated about the story of how it got its red breast. I
yes.
thought that was amazing. I had never heard of that before. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, I'll just read it out to you if that's
Yes,
easier.
that would be perfect.
Yeah, that one's so fun too. It has a little robin with a fire in the
I love
illustration,
it.
which is so fun. And the meaning I assigned it was hope. In colder parts of North America, the first sight of a robin after a long winter is a symbol of hope for the coming warmth of spring. The Shishlosh people tell a story of how the robin got his red breast. During a cold winter when the world was new, the young men left their tribe's cave to find food and wood for the fire. An elder man watched the fire and carefully kept it going for the people, but after many days awake, he fell asleep, and the fire began to go out. A gray robin saw that the fire was fading and beat his wings to keep it alive, burning his chest feathers bright orange in the process. The bird saved the people from freezing in the night, and the hunters returned the following day with food and firewood.
I love that.
So fun. Yeah.
And that's what's so fun about your book too, is obviously I know a little bit about the robin, but not too much. So always seeing them around, having them be the state bird, I think having that story is just so wonderful that now I can share that with other people. And that's something that I just love about what you've done.
I think,
Um, Blue Jays, I had seen some people in the chat say that blue jays are their favorite book or
yes.
favorite bird. And
Really funny.
so in the book, you say that blue jays mean treachery
Mhm.
and that they fly the line between cunning and deceit. There we go. There's the infamous blue jay.
Yep.
And I wanted to include, obviously, since we're the Mark Twain house, a little quote about that Mark Twain said about the blue jay. And he said, a blue jay hasn't any more principle than an ex-congressman, and he will steal, deceive, and betray 4 times out of 5. And as for the sacredness of an obligation, you cannot scare him in the detail of principle. And he actually writes a ton about the blue jay. I would say that's one of the birds he writes the most often about. What did you think about the blue jay? Obviously, we have some blue jay fans in the chat, but what's your opinion on them?
I love them personally. I think they're really cool birds, and they like imitate other birds too when they're outside on your nest. And they're a corvid, so they're like related to crows and magpies and ravens, but they're this beautiful blue color, and I think they're really cool and attractive birds. But I feel like they're also one of the most hated birds as well. And so earlier this year, I did like a print of a blue jay with like some snowdrop flowers. And it is like the least popular print I've ever done because I feel like people, they just don't like blue jays. They have like a vendetta against them. I don't know if they're like eating people's plants in their gardens, or I think they bully birds at the bird feeder too, which like I don't mind. I like seeing them. But
They are
they're really
beautiful.
hated.
Yeah, so I'm very happy we have blue jay fans in the crowd,
Me too. I love a
because
blue jay.
it's a stunning bird, and I like a
Yeah,
little bird with a little personality.
me
So
too. Yeah, I
there we
like
go.
a blue corvid too. It's like that's cool. You know, it's not
Exactly.
like a boring black bird. It's blue. It's
Right.
gorgeous.
Yes, they are very, very pretty. Um, so switching gears a little bit, my kind of surprise favorite bird for me when I was going through was the bowerbird, and I
Mhm. Oh
loved the
yeah.
meaning behind it. That they mean artistry, that they
Mhm.
create an artful tunnel that leads to a decorated court full of carefully selected items arranged by color and shape in order to entice females to mate. I thought that was so cool. There we go. Do you have a favorite? I know it's kind of a
Ooh,
loaded question, but is there a meaning or a fact that you love the most when you read about it?
I think my favorite bird is probably a magpie. Um,
Okay.
Magpies are fun because they're kind of goofy birds, but they're also really striking. Like they have little tuxedos on, and they're like black and white, but they have like iridescence to them. And I think they're really interesting because they relate to like prophecy and ornithomancy as well, which is just interesting that that's kind of like stuck around. And there's an 18th century British nursery rhyme called One for Sorrow that I think is the coolest thing. And so it tells you if you're seeing one magpie, two magpies, three, et cetera, what they mean. So the more that you see, you know, it's a different fortune. And so it's one for sorrow, two for joy, three for a girl, four for a boy, five for silver, six for gold, seven for a secret never to be told, which is just
Oh,
so fun.
that is fun.
Yeah. And I mean,
Oh
whenever
no.
I see magpies, it's always when I'm like visiting England or Ireland, Scotland, they're always around like hopping about. And I just think they're silly, but they're elegant in their own way too.
Love that. Well, if you're in the chat and your favorite bird is something other than a blue jay, let us know. Let us know
Yeah.
what your favorite is. Um, so one of the other things are that I picked up in your book are sort of common beliefs that
Mhm.
I ended up being wrong about or weren't mentioned. So one of the big ones was the cardinal. So
Mhm.
I've always been told, and I'm sure a lot of people have been as well, that if you see a cardinal, it's sort of a loved one that has passed away visiting you.
Mhm.
But that's not mentioned in your entry. So is a couple questions. A, is that a common misconception? And B, are there any bird meanings or stories that weren't what you expected that kind of surprised you?
Yeah, so with the cardinal, I hear that a lot. I think people say that a lot about cardinals. I hear it about other birds too. Like I think it just
Oh,
takes on the meaning of if you see a bird and you like that bird, or if that bird was important to like a loved one that has passed, maybe it's like coming back. Yeah, so I like couldn't find many reliable sources that talked about it being a loved one. And you know, like a lot of that could just be that these things aren't recorded. Especially like oral tales that are coming from like the American South too, things that were passed on from, you know, different places. some of those things, they just don't get written down, and then it makes it hard to put it into the book when it's just like an oral history. So there's like a couple where that was the case where I was like, oh, I hear this, but I can't really find any resources to back it up. And yeah, it is what it is, but I
But I
wish there
love it
was
because
more.
that's kind of, I would always think cardinal and that would come to mind.
Yeah.
So in your book, I found it fascinating because I learned other things about the cardinal, which is
Yeah.
great that I can now bring up to
Right.
people.
And I just love that they're bright red, so I think people tend to notice them a lot more
Yeah,
too than other birds, and especially in winter too, if there's not a lot of color and it's snowing.
that
That's what's distinctive. That's the pop of color that you see.
that also makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
now when you think about it. Um, is there a bird that you found personally meaningful to you while you were doing this? I ended up loving the story of the cassowary. That was
Mhm.
ended up being one of my favorites. But is
Yeah.
there one for you that connected to you in some deeper way?
So there's the heron, and I'll flip to it. But so whenever I would walk my dog, I see a heron on our little greenway, and I really love them because they're just really beautiful birds. And then for a while, I wasn't seeing the heron that I see all the time, and he's kind of old, like he's raggedy looking heron. And so I hadn't seen him in a few weeks, and I've been walking the dog and I've been looking for him and haven't seen him in the creek. And the day I was working on the illustration for the heron, I finally saw him again. It had been so long, and I really thought he was a goner, but he was there. And so their meaning is a positive message. And I just think they're such beautiful birds. And it was such a positive day when I got to see it. And I just love that synchronicity too of I was looking for him and I couldn't find him. And then I started on the illustration and there he was, just waiting for me.
Oh, that's amazing. It's like
Mhm.
serendipity.
Yeah, it was perfect. It was so perfect when I saw him.
Oh, I love that. Um, Another kind of specific question, I thought this was fascinating. You did include an eagle in your book, but you went with the golden eagle instead
Yep.
of the bald eagle.
Yeah.
Why did you make that choice?
I feel like the bald eagle is so boring looking, and I didn't want to draw it. But also I like the golden eagle better, and I like the myth that comes with it. Because my dad always used to say to me, like, you have eagle eyes, like, because you can spot things, which is
Yep.
kind of like it's my secret talent. Like when I go to a museum or a zoo or something, and you're like looking for the animal in the exhibit, and you're like, oh, it's supposed to be this like green spotted frog, and I'm like, yep, it's right there. You can find it immediately. And so I
Oh,
always
wow.
love the saying eagle eyes, and I love that it comes like all the way from ancient Greece too, and that's something that we still say today because they thought eagles could stare at the sun without blinking. And it was like a sign of their strength, which is fascinating to me.
That's a great reason.
Yeah.
I love that reasoning. It makes complete sense to me now. Um, Now, going back a little bit to the meanings behind some of the birds. So, some of them made sense to me. So, I have down the goose, the pigeon, the stork. I have heard those meanings before, recognize them. But then I was very surprised at how many meanings shocked me for birds that I consider pretty common.
Mhm.
So, flamingo, the hummingbird, the mockingbird, the nightingale, the owl, the rooster, and the vulture
Yeah.
specifically
Mhm.
surprised me. I did not expect the meanings behind them.
Yeah.
I especially loved the story of the parrot.
Yeah.
So, can you talk a little bit about that? And if you
Sure.
could share from one of those many that I listed,
Yeah.
whatever one you found the most interesting or different.
One of my absolute favorites is the flamingo because I feel like people write off the flamingo as being like it's just like a pretty pink bird, which is it is, but they are the inspiration for the mythical phoenix, which I think is just the coolest thing in the world. And so they're absolute like maniacs in terms of their survival skills. Like they can stand in a lake and the lake will freeze. They're perfectly fine, doesn't bother them. They can drink caustic water, they can stand in boiling water, and they're perfectly fine, doesn't bother them at all. And so they're kind of absolute badass birds. And so, you know, ancient essentially travelers to the Great Rift Valley in Eastern Africa, they would see these birds out in the distance, and they'd be surrounded by the thick boiling mist. And it would look like they were standing in boiling water because the lake was bubbling, it was caustic, and these birds were just fine hanging out there. And so these stories and these reports would get passed from region to region, and you know, they're firebirds. Their scientific name even has like the first part of the word phoenix in it as well. So it passed to the Greeks and then to Europe and inspired the tale of the phoenix, which would rise from the ashes and be born from flames, because these beautiful big pink birds would come out of this really like just terrible environment. Like, who else can survive in a boiling, caustic lake, or even like a lake that freezes? They're just so adaptable. So yeah, there's a little bit more to like, you know, this gaudy pink bird than most people think.
And that's what I love about it, because if you asked me what is one of the toughest birds, flamingo would probably be very low on my list.
Should be like number one.
Yeah, but in
Yeah,
reality, it should be at the top of the list.
yeah.
So I found that very, very interesting. Um, and I just want to tell people right now, if you have questions, start putting them in the chat, because we're going to get to the Q&A shortly. So as I said earlier, all your illustrations are absolutely stunning. I mean, I just happened to see the hornbill right here,
Oh,
which
those
is
are so fun.
amazing. Did you have a favorite to draw and or a favorite end result? And I think of all the ones, it was very hard for me to choose, but I absolutely loved the kingfisher. That's my go-to. So how about you? What ended up being your favorite?
I think my favorite would be maybe the raven. It's one of the
Okay.
first ones that I did. Um, Let me find him. Because I like ravens. They're just kind of fun. But we have like, because it relates to Hunan and Munin, who are Odin's ravens in like Norse mythology. So we have Odin's little helmet down here. And I put some leaves growing out of this one because he's a one-eyed god. And so the ravens would fly around the world and they would listen and tell, you know, their names mean like thought and memory, and they were his spies. So they would go around and tell Odin all the things that they saw that day and all the things that they heard. So I really like, I think just the poses of the birds that came out really good. And this is one of the first ones I did, so I spent more time on it
Yep.
versus some towards the end where I was like rushing to get them done.
And here, I just wanted to show the audience, this is my favorite. This is the kingfisher,
I saw a
which is
kingfisher in
beautiful.
real life when I was working on this too, which I think is so perfect. I've never seen one before.
Oh, that's amazing. How
Yeah,
weird.
so weird. And they're so distinctive looking, right? Because they've got that teal blue and their bill shape is really distinctive. And I was like, are there kingfishers in Tennessee? And so I had to get on my phone and look it up, and there are. So I was like, okay, I definitely saw it. Like that was real.
Oh my gosh. And I'm sure they're stunning
Oh, they're
in person
gorgeous.
as well.
And they're kind of small too. So they're not, yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, gorgeous
Oh,
though.
they're all of these are gorgeous though. So as Omar put the link in the chat, make sure you go on and buy this book, because like I said, not only is it a beautiful book with your illustrations, but full of so much wonderful information and interesting facts. So make sure you go grab it for yourself, and you should probably get one as a gift for someone, because the holidays are around the corner before we know it. Now, another thing I picked up on in your book is that you mentioned some of the bird calls and sounds that they made, and it made me want to start to Google and YouTube those sounds. So, did you watch any videos of the birds or listen to audio of them, and did that help with your illustrations in any way?
Yeah, so the bittern is like he's like a little marsh bird. And they have a booming call, and then everything that you read about it, it says booming, booming. And you're like, what does that really sound like? It's so haunting. It is definitely, you can see where these like stories come from. You know, like the Hounds of the Baskerville mentions like the bittern as like, you know, one of these one of the things that might be causing the noise on the moors. And then there's a Slavic story about a young boy who goes out to try to discover, they think that there's this demon on the marsh and like nobody's getting food from the village because no one's going out to fish anymore. And he's like, no, I'm going to figure out what it is. And it's just a bittern making the noise. But you could definitely see it because it's such a creepy, eerie sound that like, as I was working on it, I was like, I called my husband over. I was like, you have to listen to this. Like, can you believe a bird makes this noise? But there's this great app you can download called Merlin. And
Oh,
it's from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and you can just leave it open, and any birds that are chirping in the background when you're outside, it'll tell you what they are, and it highlights them as they're
ooh,
chirping. It's so good because I'm really bad at telling what birds are from their calls. It's hard.
yes.
They sound a lot of them sound alike, like blue jays can mimic a lot of other birds like hawks and things to try to get, the birds away from the feeder. And so it's hard to tell what they are. I have such a hard time with it, but that app is awesome.
Oh, everyone in the chat is like, I love that app. I have that
Yeah.
app.
I wouldn't know what birds were around me if it wasn't for Merlin.
So did you end up looking up because I know there's some in there like the dodo, for example, that isn't around anymore. But did you end up looking up the sounds of every bird that you ended up putting in the book, or did you kind of pick and choose randomly?
If the sound was like important to the myth, I would
Okay.
listen. So like the warbler, and there's a couple others where the thrasher, because I think the thrasher has the largest vocal repertoire of any bird. And they have something like a dual like voice box. So they can make two notes at once, which is amazing. Yeah. So they can kind of harmonize with themselves, which is really impressive. And yeah, a lot of people have trouble like picking out the sounds that thrashers make just because they can make so different many sounds. And catbirds too. There's a catbird in the book. And I had not heard them before, and I went to visit my friend Ginny, who lives in Syracuse, and she has tons of them in her yard. And I was like, is there a cat in your yard? Like, do you have a cat that comes around? And she's like, no, those are the catbirds. Like, they actually sound like cats. And it was unbelievable to me because it's like, what? I mean, I guess it's advantageous to them to sound like a predator out there,
Wow.
meowing, but it's funny.
Did you ever think you would know this much about birds by the time you were done with this?
No. And I feel
You're
like
just
there's still
full of
so
facts.
much I don't know too. Like I think that there was like the first event I did, someone asked me how many bird species there are, and I had to go and look it up because I was like, I don't, it's a lot. Like I know it's a lot, but now I know it's 11,000, but it is debated how many there actually are. But yeah, I never thought I would. It's like these things that you get like kind of curious about, and then you
Yep.
start digging in further and further, and then you're in this like inescapable research hole. And now I know way too much about birds, but
You're
it's
in the
good for
rabbit hole.
crosswords too. Like whenever I do like the New York Times crossword, the tern is in there a lot because they have the longest migration. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I've always loved birds. I think they're beautiful, but I never got too much into it. And now after your book, I'm like, I fell down the rabbit hole and now I need to know everything about birds.
Yeah.
Um, so another one, which I'm hoping you can read from, because I love this story. And, we talked a little bit about favorite meanings and favorite illustrations, but this is my favorite story, I think, in the book is about the loon.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you can read that, and then if you
Sure.
have a favorite story or mythology specifically that you found out. And I'm
Yeah.
also going to switch locations while you read this, so I will
Okay.
pop up in a different area, but go right ahead.
Perfect. Okay. So I'll show you all what the loon looks like. So beautiful. And the meaning is a helping hand. Excellent swimmers with unique black and white markings and haunting red eyes, loons trace their meaning to a Tsimshian legend from the Pacific Northwest coast of North America. An old man who had recently gone blind went to a lake to sing about his misery. Without his sight, he could no longer gather food for his family. When the loon heard his song, it told the man to mount its back and bury its face in his feathers. The loon dove beneath the water's surface twice, and when the pair emerged, the man had regained his sight. In thanks, he gave the loon his precious shell necklace, which the bird has worn ever since, a band of white against the dark plumage of its neck. So it's this little bit right here, which is very distinctive on a loon, and one of my favorite illustrations from the book too. That one's really great. I did that one towards the beginning too.
I love that story.
Yeah. I have kind of a gross one if you want kind of a gross one, but that's interesting.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to talk about the pelican. Um, which this one blew my mind. Like, I have to tell everyone about this one because it's so weird. So the meaning is duty. And the fascinating lore of these water birds can be traced to an educational Greek text compiled in the 3rd century by an unknown Greek author. It states that pelicans kill their young in frustration, then revive them in their remorse using their own blood, an allegory for the resurrection of Jesus. This was likely a misunderstanding of how pelicans feed their young. They regurgitate food from the red pouch under their bill, pressing the pouch against their chest to empty it completely. The result is a bloody-looking mess. Medieval Christians modified this understanding, believing that in their intense devotion, the pelican mother would wound her own breast to feed her young her own blood. So Queen Elizabeth I of England even adopted this symbolism. In a famous portrait by Nicholas Hilliard, she wears a pelican pendant on her chest. And it got cut from this because we were going on and on, but there is a Scottish World War II poster encouraging people to donate blood using that pelican imagery with the red chest. So it's,
Wow.
yeah, that like duty and devotion for such a weird and interesting bird. And you just don't think that when you look at a pelican. They're just kind of weird looking.
Absolutely. I would never have thought there'd be any sort of story associated like that with the pelican.
Yeah.
Um, so we're getting close to Q&A, and Omar's just reminding everyone, please add your questions to the Q&A. We're going to do that in just a couple minutes, and I'll ask Omar to come back and start that. So make sure you get those in. So I was wondering, I thought this would be an interesting question for you. There's some birds that I felt like their appearance didn't match their legend or story. So for example, the shrike, which I found fascinating,
Yeah.
is what came to mind for me. Are there any others that came across kind of mismatched to you?
Yeah. So there's one, the harpy eagle, which is it's a very distinctive looking bird. But when you think about a harpy, like they have human heads and they're basically like women bird mashups from Greek mythology, which is how they get their name. And there are so many sources that I read that said they kind of look like faces. And I was like, they don't though. They just look like a bird.
Right.
And so I do wonder how those birds got their name. They are really big and kind of scary. So maybe like the first one that landed next to someone who knew about the legend of the harpy was like, that must be because they're just so big. I know they also smell pretty bad, which is also associated with harpies. But I couldn't find much about that fact, which is they just like, you know, keep the carcasses of like the animals that they eat around them. So it kind of ends up smelling. So that's another one. But yeah, the shrike is interesting because you don't expect these little tiny birds to be so violent and they just look
Yeah,
like chickadees, but they're so evil.
they are.
Yeah.
I've never even heard of that bird before, but I usually, when I was going through your book, I'd flip the page and obviously I'd immediately be drawn to your illustrations because they're so beautiful. And so I saw the shrike at first and I went, oh, what an adorable little bird. And then I read the description of it and I thought, oh, that's an intense bird. So
It
can't always
is.
judge a book by its cover for sure.
It's very true.
Um, Now, you kind of brought this up earlier when we talked about the flamingo, but did you ever at any point consider including mythical birds like the phoenix or the griffin or the thunderbird, or did you want to strictly just keep it to real birds?
Yeah, I definitely thought about it when I was trying to figure out what I wanted the book to be about. And initially, when I pitched the book to my publisher, I didn't pitch it as like a follow-up to Floriography. I pitched it as kind of a standalone. book, but obviously it follows like the same formatting. So I don't know why I didn't think of putting it in the same kind of series. But yeah, when I was pitching this, I had just started working on a book, a children's book called A Natural History of Magical Beasts. And that's written by
Mhm.
Emily Hawkins. It's published by Quarto Kids, and it's a really cool book. So I got to draw a lot of the magical beasts like the phoenix, and there's so many really weird ones. There's like a Groot slang or something. There are just lots of really weird birds in that one too. Um, yeah. And so I got to draw a lot of them from there. And I was thinking, you don't want things to be too similar that are coming out like around the same time. So I figured we'll keep it real birds, for now. But I would love to do like a mythical beast compendium of my own. That's maybe more like geared toward adult audiences than kids too.
That would be amazing.
Because there's a lot of really weird, dark mythological creatures.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that would be fascinating. It sounds like you have an idea for your next
Yeah.
project, but um, I'm going to bring Omar back to see if we have anything in our Q&A. And if not, I have a few more questions of my own. So Omar, do we have any questions?
Sure. We have three questions. Um, the first one is there's so much great folklore and history in this book. What does your research process for a book like this look like?
Ooh, that's such a good question. It's long. It takes forever. So I know with some of them I have an idea of what the myths are already, and then there's some where I have no idea. So I'll generally start by trying to read a bit about it. And so I have some more modern books that have to do with bird folklore that kind of set me on the journey. One is Peter Tate's Flights of Fancy, which is really good. And I think there's like 15 British birds in it, which kind of led me on, a long path of looking up different bird myths and things like that. And then it's a lot of double, triple, like quadruple checking things. A lot of reading like ancient Greek texts that have been translated into English because I don't know ancient Greek. But yeah, if I have to read more Pliny the Elder, like, oh, it's so hard to get through, and he has such crazy ideas, and it's a lot. Aristotle too, he has a whole history of animals, where a lot of these like legends and myths come from, which is it's intense to read that much. Then, Greek mythology, I tend to know a lot about just because I have an interest in it, Norse mythology too. So I know some things, but I always try to, make sure I'm pulling from real actual sources. And it's definitely harder out there now with AI just making stuff up on the internet. So the internet's basically not a useful source anymore. Which is very difficult. So I end up reading a lot of old ancient texts. There is one from, I think, the early 1500s that I was reading about British folklore that was influenced so many different ones. I think it's called like the names and stories of British birds, or a treasury of British birds, or something like that. It's fascinating though, but it's a lot of digging through old texts and manuscripts and taking notes, and also reading about, information from like the Audubon Society and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and things like that, making sure I'm getting the facts right about, how many songs a thrasher knows and how far an Arctic tern flies. So, yeah.
If you need help with the ancient Greek next time, give me a call. My
Oh,
partner
for
does
sure.
know ancient Greek.
Ooh, yes, read Pliny the Elder for me because it's so dense.
Actually, I had a random thought and I was like I texted him and I'm like, what were the honorifics for in ancient Greece? And he sent me the actual Greek letters and also like in English.
That's so cool.
Muriel Roux, maybe there's a connection
Yeah,
there.
my mom.
Yes,
Thanks,
I thought so. Uh, Hi, Mom. Are there
Mom.
many, she asked, are there many birds that you notice at sunset rather than morning?
Ooh, I walked my dog last night, and she doesn't know this because I haven't talked to her today. So this is not a plant. But I saw chimney swifts going into my neighbor's chimney, which was it's an incredible sight. And I believe they're a protected species. So like if they are in your chimney, like, you can't do anything about it.
Mhm.
But they were all swarming, and when I first saw them, I thought that they were bats because they look like little bats up in the sky flapping their wings, and they were all piling into the chimney one by one, and so they were swarming all around it, and then one by one going in, which is
Oh,
kind of a
wow.
beautiful sight. Yeah, so I love seeing that, and I tend to see them at night and in the evenings. I think that's when they kind of tend to maybe go out and search for food before they come back home. But yeah, and then, I tend to I have chickens. So I let them out in the afternoon out of their run so that they can free range in the backyard. And I'll sit outside with them for a little bit. And so I see hummingbirds, which is really fun, and crows, blue jays, yeah, cardinals, and we see like chickadees, robins. Yeah, so those are kind of our daytime birds.
There's a question about your chickens.
Oh, yeah.
Can you well, first I want to know if some or all of them have names. And someone asked, can you tell us about the meaning of chickens?
Sure. So they all have names. There's 8 hens. Um, I'm gonna try to name them out. I might forget one or two, my apologies in advance to my chickens. There's Penguin, who's my favorite, and she's when she was a baby chick, she looked like a baby penguin. So
Oh,
she was really like fluffy and gray and super cute. So Penguin, uh, Ramona, Rumor, Odette, Minerva, Henrietta, um, oh, let me think. I'm definitely forgetting some. Oh
those are
well.
great names. They're great
I
names.
know they all Madeline. Madeline from the kids' book to the little French schoolgirl because she just follows the other chickens
I
around.
love Rumor. Rumor is
Yeah.
just like just
Yeah.
about,
She's a little Stevie Nicks reference.
yeah,
Yeah.
very like Rumor is like the bartender at your little dive bar,
Yeah.
like
When she was a little baby chick, she was orange and then she had white wings. So we were like white winged dove. And then rumor is how we got there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I have another question. How are the birds different where you live now versus where you grew up? And are there any birds that you miss from home, wherever home is for you, or
Yeah,
like, where you grew up?
I grew up in North Carolina, so it's not too far from where I ended up. But for a while I lived in Florida, which was interesting because Florida has like some crazy beautiful birds. So I definitely miss some of the ones that I used to see there. There was like a scissor-tailed hawk that I would see very often. Those are gorgeous. And then we had an owl, a barred owl that lived in a tree in our backyard, that would drop feathers all the time. So I have a bunch of barred owl feathers that I took from, because his nest was just right up in the tree. And there is an eagle nest, just a few houses down, which I think they like record different eagle nests. So I had to like write it in to feel like, oh, there's an eagle in my neighborhood. But yeah, I definitely miss seeing those birds, especially like any like scissor-tailed bird. They're really gorgeous when you see them flying in the sky too, because it's just so striking.
Cool, cool. I was doing this sort of nature meditation thing, and this barred owl just came really like up to a branch, like right like over me. And I was
Wow.
like, oh, like the the energies.
Yeah. Every time I've seen one at night, like when they swoop, I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is where alien like myths come from because
Yeah.
they have like big circular heads, and I'm like, that's an alien in that tree.
Um, and last question that we have on here, which bird meaning surprised you the most?
Ooh, which one? Let me look through.
It's like asking what's your, favorite music or your
I
favorite movie.
know. Oh, the waxwing is interesting because they're really pretty. Those are gorgeous birds. But they kept showing up in Europe when there were plague outbreaks. And so they kind of ended up getting a
Oh.
negative meaning of malady. Yeah, they just kind of ended up like coinciding with a lot of outbreaks in the Middle Ages, and they would call them Pestvogel in German, which is plague bird. Which like they're so pretty. And they've got those little red tips on their wings, which I think they're really gorgeous birds. So it's kind of unfortunate that something so pretty just kept happening to show
Mhm,
up whenever
mhm.
the plague was breaking out. And I think that's just, seasonal, how we have different like flus
Yeah.
that come about in cold times and that kind of thing.
Mhm, mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
But the
Yeah.
poor waxwings.
Unlike the rats, the waxwings did not have anything to do with the
Yeah,
plague.
nothing to do with it. They just were showing up and being like, oh, hey, we're migrating here for now. And people were like, that's it. That's what's causing it. You can tell because they've got little red like drips of wax on their wing. That's bad.
Yeah. I just had a funny like image of a like a medieval, this is mean. This is very mean. But I had like an image of a medieval person like cuddling a rat being like, "You stupid waxwing, it's your fault." I'm like, "Oh, baby, my
Yeah,
baby
petting the little
rat."
baby rat. Have you watched the Decameron?
Not yet.
Oh, you
No.
have to watch it. It's so good. It's really funny,
It
especially if you
sounds
like
like that would
weird
that would be
medieval
a scene
stuff.
in that. Carrie wants to know, what she says, absolutely beautiful book. The index is an added treat, so helpful. Um, have you worked with any ornithological groups, like Cornell?
I haven't. No, I would love to do any kind of work there. When I lived in Florida, we had like a great museum in Gainesville, a natural history museum that had a lot of bird specimens, just
Mm-hmm.
like floor to ceiling displays throughout this one hall. So I took a lot of pictures of those whenever I'm there and whenever I'm in a museum and they have, some bird taxidermy. I'm always taking pictures and looking at those for reference later on. But I haven't done anything like that. I would love to. I'd love to give a talk or something like that if people want to know,
Mm-hmm.
the weird stories behind their favorite birds. That's kind of
Wow.
what I'm all about.
For anyone in New England, I highly recommend going to Plum Island in Massachusetts. It's there's a bird sanctuary and it's like a massive stopover for like migrating birds. So I highly recommend going to Massachusetts to see the birds in Plum Island. I'm sure there are many other spots, including places like in Florida, where you get a
Yeah.
lot of birds.
Yeah, there's some different, resource like groups that have protected birds in the areas
Hmm.
too, which is really great. Um, yeah, my husband used to work in like the theme park industry, so he would sometimes be at SeaWorld and taking pictures of the weird birds and things that they had there and texting them to me. Because he knew that I loved the roseate spoonbill, and he was like, "This is
Hmm.
the ugliest bird in the world." Like, no, it's beautiful. It's my favorite.
Mallory, do you have any last questions?
So to end, I just wanted to say, Floriography is your other book that we had you for, and it is gorgeous and interesting as well. So if you haven't had the chance yet, make sure you buy Ornithography and Floriography from us because they're both amazing. And I guess to close is, do you have something in mind for your next project, which of course we want to have you back for? And if you do, can you tell us about it? Is it a secret? So where are you heading next, do you think?
Yeah, so I'll tell you about it. I think
Oh,
I can.
perfect.
Yeah, so it's going to come out next fall. So you guys might know the Woodland Wardens Oracle Deck. So I'm writing and illustrating a tarot deck that will be a Woodland Wardens tarot. Tarot of the Woodland Wardens. So 78 cards instead of the 52 in here. So a
Hmm.
lot more work, but I've done the major arcana and I have my to-do list off to the side. I've done the wands and the cups, and I'm halfway through the arrows, which is like going to be the swords, but arrows because it's more naturey. And then I have the Pentacles to finish after that. So not too much work done. I've already written it, so that's great. And it's a lot of fun. Like writing those kinds of things, they draw a lot from history, mythology, and folklore, as well as similar to the book, but I find them a little bit easier to write because, tarot has a structure already.
Yeah.
So you're kind of plugging things in where they go, or the meanings line up for these different creatures and what kind of fits. So it's been fun, really fun to work on. And then hopefully after that, I'll come up with something that's not flowers or birds for the next one in the
I
series.
think you have something with the mythical creatures. I
No,
think
I
that would be really
100%.
cool.
Because there's definitely, it has to be 100 is the issue that you run into. So you're thinking about doing like gems or mushrooms or something like that. And I'm like, is there 100 different ones with like 100 different stories that are interesting? And would it be fun to draw that many? But yeah, magical creatures I think would be cool. Even just like a zoography or something with
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ooh.
we've had some programs about cryptids too,
Ooh.
so you can kind of include all those.
Yeah, I love that. There's like a correlation between the crane and the Mothman, where some people think
Oh.
that the Mothman might just be like a whooping crane because they have
Yeah.
kind of like the red heads, and so they think maybe people are just kind of misseeing them, and they're huge too. So there's a bird cryptid fact for you.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us again. We always love to have you and hope to have you again in the future. And make sure you go and purchase Ornithography because, as I said, it's beautiful and full of interesting, wonderful facts about birds. I know that I will fall deeper and deeper into a rabbit hole and I'm going to read it again and again. So thank you as always for doing this, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I
Yes.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Mallory, for moderating this evening, and thanks to our audience for joining us. Have a good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Yeah,
Good
thanks.
night.
Night.